Hello everyone and welcome to today's Identical live webinar, which is female to female hostility at workplace, all you need to know. And today's webinar has been presented by Susan Starros. And the webinar is going to be for 60 minutes and all the attendees will be placed on mute. If you have any questions or any doubts in between, you can use the chat window to send your questions and Susan will be able to answer them. And we will have a Q&A at the end of the session for 10 minutes so that any questions can be answered even at the end of the minute. All right. And I think Susan can introduce and start the session today. And sorry
Okay,
for the delay.
sounds good. Welcome, everybody, and sorry for the delay here. Part of that was my error because I had it down for a different time. At any rate, greetings from Minnesota, where it's a gloomy day. I hope you're having a better day. So let's move forward and talk about female-to-female bullying. This just gives you a little bit of my background. And these are the objectives. We're going to define bullying. And you know what? These are, I don't know here. I'm going to escape this. And one of the things that's happening here is I do not, okay. All right, so it looks, all right, so we're going to define bullying, and we'll look at women's ways of bullying. And we'll look at some of the causes and contributing factors that would play a role in women's bullying. And then finally, what's management's role in the prevention and intervention of women's bullying? And then what are the steps to take if you are targeted by a bully? So there's a number of implications that are involved. Psychological, certainly. There are psychological issues. We know that people that are bullied face a number of emotional problems, everything from suicide ideation to suicide to emotional distress, depression. It's a managerial issue. Managers are responsible for the prevention and intervention. I'm talking about bullying in general right now, of bullying. It's a legal issue, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we progress through. Certainly, it's an ethical issue. That's a no-brainer. It's a health issue. Those that are bullied are subjected to all sorts of health problems, everything from migraine headaches to GI upsets to getting sick more frequently because bullying is a stressor. And as a result of it being a stressor, you are more prone to have your immune system compromised and get sick. And it's a human rights issue. This kind of maladaptive behavior occurs in workplaces throughout the world. So the history of bullying research, well, it began in the Scandinavian countries, and it began in the 1970s. First of all, examining it in the schools, and then in the workplaces. Finally, other aspects of Europe jumped on the bandwagon, and they likewise began to do research. And really, the United States has been a little bit slow. But finally, the United States began examining bullying in schools. Now they label all misconduct as bullying, which is a mistake because most of the misconduct in schools is actually illegal harassment, not bullying, which is not illegal. And it is in the workplace. We are finally examining bullying in the workplace as well. So when we think about it, what is bullying anyway? I just love that picture of the sneer on the bottom of the page. Isn't it wonderful? So there's a number of labels for bullying, and these are the different words that you will hear used or that you will see written in magazines, journal articles, trade magazines, etc. And what the label is will be dependent upon who is conducting the research. Is it somebody from sociology? Is it somebody from psychology? Somebody from law? Somebody from another country? So it all varies. And the definition of bullying, I will let you read through this. Now, there are a number of definitions of bullying, but most of them have some commonalities, which are reflected in this definition. As you look at this definition, you'll see the words persistent and repeated and absolutely malicious and intimidating. Now let's look at that for a minute, because the words persistent and repeated are key. This isn't somebody who, and which is all of us, by the way, who get up on the wrong side of the bed in the morning. You know how that goes. You wake up and, doggone it, you didn't sleep well, you're a little bit tired, your 17-year-old didn't make it home on curfew last night, your 2-year-old is having a temper tantrum, your dog threw up on your brand new carpet, and you're in a fight with your significant other. You get the idea, right? You come into work and you're a little on the crabby side, and you might snap at somebody. Now, this isn't your typical workplace behavior. It's not okay that you snap at somebody, but hey, we're all human and it happens once in a while, right? That is not being a bully. A bully, a true bully, is somebody who behaves this way repeatedly. They're malicious about it. They're persistent, and they're intentional, all right? So a real bully in the workplace is probably not quite as common as individuals that might on occasion be rude, disrespectful, and incivil. Now, I'm going to use the word bully today rather loosely. All right, so sometimes when I'm using the word bully today, we're talking about just some rude, disrespectful behavior. Okay, now let's take a look at this particular, I think somebody's gone in and done a little bit here with my slides. So if you take a look at the quote in the darkened print, take a look at that, all right, and see what you think. Now, this came out of the nursing literature because if you want to talk about female-to-female bullying, it is rampant in healthcare. Nurse-to-nurse bullying, and while there are male nurses, we're talking primarily female-to-female. And what some of the research is suggesting that actually extends beyond the nursing literature is that one of the reasons that people bully is it's their way of fighting back against the dysfunction of the organization. So women's hostility to women, what is that and how might that differ from hostility that men portray? Well, first of all, we have a number of different labels that are used when we refer to women bullying women. And as you take a look at these labels that are on the screen, you see words like indirect and covert. You also see relational, because women's ways of bullying are very often, not always, but very often different than men's. Because let's face it, if we get angry as women, even starting as little girls, we really don't get permission for that, do we? And a bully is an angry person. So we're called witches or naughty girls, or as we get older, the W in witch changes to a B. So we don't get the same permission as do men. Consequently, as women, we've learned other ways to get out our anger, and it's very often coming out sideways. Now you'll notice here that we've got the words horizontal and lateral. So we do notice that while women will bully somebody that is equal to them in the power structure in the organization, they will also bully upward and bully their supervisor. Now, when we think about different kinds of bullying, these are some of these indirect ways that we bully. And they're more subtle. They are nuanced, right? I mean, ignoring somebody, excluding them, manipulating. Now let's take a look at a little case example. And let's say that you are all in a staff meeting, And you're talking about a quality improvement project or something like that. And anyway, Susie identifies an idea. She says, well, I think one of the things that we could do about this problem we're dealing with is ABC. Well, Joni, who's sitting across from Susie, rolls her eyes, puts her arms over her chest, turns away, and basically ignores Susie after she makes that comment. Now, I think we've all been in meetings where that has occurred, right? It could be a formal meeting. It might be an informal meeting. Maybe a bunch of you are all sitting at somebody's desk or in a staff room informally, and somebody will behave that way. So what happens when somebody behaves that way? What do we usually do? Well, don't we usually ignore it? Nobody really says anything. And so what happens when nobody says anything? Well, what happens is that it ends up having others not want to contribute. Other people are going to feel intimidated. They will feel, why should I say something if Jackie's going to behave this way to me and nobody says anything to Jackie and you can get by with it? And so people shut down, they don't contribute, and morale drops, and people don't trust, and there goes your effective decision-making and problem-solving, right? We've all been there. So this is what you do. You are facilitating the meeting, and you are the manager. So Susie has just contributed an idea, ABC. Joni turned away, rolled her eyes, crossed her arms over her chest. You've seen it, and you are facilitating the meeting. This is what you do. Joni, I noticed that you just rolled your eyes and turned away from the group and crossed your arms over your chest. That tells me you don't agree with what Susie has said. Tell me about that. And Jackie will say, well, yeah, you're right. I don't really, because I tell you what, from our perspective in our department, ABC would never work. You've got to use XYZ. Now, what did you do here? You called Jackie out. You did it respectfully. You did it by calling attention to her observable, objective behavior. You called her out about rolling her eyes, turning away from the group, crossing her arms over her chest, which everybody noticed. And then you said, that tells me that you don't agree with Susie. So what you've done here is a number of things. One, everybody in the group knows now that if you behave that way, you will be called out, but you'll be called out respectfully. Also, people then might feel more safety in offering their ideas, their suggestions. The other thing you've done is you've given permission to Jackie and therefore to the group. Hey, it's okay if you see things differently. It's okay if you disagree. In fact, we want disagreements, right? That's how good decisions are made. That's how conflict is resolved. Hopefully, that will take care of it. But you're back a week and a half later at another staff meeting. Susie offers her suggestion again, and doggone that Jackie if she doesn't do her same thing. So what do? You call her out on it the same way. Jackie, I noticed that you're rolling your eyes again. You're crossing your arms and you're turning away from the group. So it tells me you're not agreeing. And Jackie again says, well, yes, yada, yada, yada. Now you've got a decision to make. You've called Jackie out twice. And the first time you did it, okay, but now she's done it again. Now you need to call Jackie into your office. You pull out your code of conduct. You give Jackie a copy of the code of conduct, and you highlight those elements in the code of conduct that are a reflection of her behavior. And you say, hey, Jackie, at the last two meetings, this is what you've done. You spell it out. And, from my perspective, that comes across as discounting of Susie and could be a violation of our code of conduct. From my perspective, it was rude, and I don't want you to do it anymore. So here's a copy of our policy, and I'd like a commitment from you that this won't happen again. Jackie apologizes. She says, yeah, you're right, it won't happen again. But you know what? She does it again. So you call her in again. Now, depending upon how your performance management system works, you should enter her into that now if you didn't already. I would call the first time that you met with her in your office maybe the teachable moment. That was kind of a freebie in a way. But she's not changed her behavior. So now you're calling her in, and this needs to be, however it works in your company, a formal verbal warning or perhaps written warning. You're documenting that you confronted her during the first 2 staff meetings, that you brought her into your office a week and a half ago and confronted her then, and now you're confronting her again. You're also going to say to Jackie, you know, I want you to be able to disagree with people. How about if you and I practice some role playing in when you're disagreeing with somebody, how you can communicate that respectfully without using the body language that can be construed as disrespectful. And so you do some coaching with Jackie. Now that's assuming you know how to do that. The other thing you might say is, Jackie, you know what? I think it would be beneficial for you to take the communications class that we're offering next week. I'd like you to take that class, please. So you have Jackie take the class. But you're going to have to respond to Jackie. You will be documenting it. You will be keeping a copy of your documentation. I'm assuming those of you that are on today, if in fact you are managers, that you would keep this in a locked drawer, but you need to give a copy of it as well to your HR rep, so that the HR rep, when she or he goes to file your documentation into their particular file, they look and they go, uh-oh, this is the 2nd or 3rd documentation that I've had about Jackie from other people as well. Now HR needs to get involved, and this performance management process needs to take on more clout. And this could end up in Jackie being terminated. So this is how it works. Now, the examples of bullying can be so subtle and so nuanced that it can be difficult for the target of the behavior. Women are good at this in even reporting it. Let's say that the woman feels as though she's excluded. She's excluded from coffee, she's excluded from lunch, she's excluded from going out for drinks after work. People kind of ignore her when she comes into work during the day. And those sorts of behaviors, the research suggests, has just as much of a negative connotation and a negative impact on the target as if you were yelling at her, shaking your finger in her face and getting in her face and your face getting red. So it's going to have negative ramifications on the target, but also on everybody else as well. And some of this can become, like I said, so nuanced that the target, it's like, how do I even go and complain to my supervisor? I'm not being included, I'm being ignored, they gossip about me, blah, blah, blah. I mean, most of the time, the target doesn't want to go complain because she's afraid she's going to be told, honey, put on your good big girl panties and deal with it. So it doesn't get reported, and the behavior continues unabated. So this gives you some examples of bullying. First of all, and I'm not going to go through all these, but these are some examples of bullying by supervisors. Whoops, excuse me, let me unplug my phone here. So this is by supervisors. here is bullying by coworkers or even subordinates, your direct reports. This is microbullying, and these are examples of what I had just talked about. So there's a myriad of different behaviors that might constitute bullying. Now, why does it occur? What's going on here anyway? What is the causation? Well, we know that certainly there's issues with the perpetrator. What might that be? Well, let's say the perpetrator has it in for a specific target because the target is smarter than her bully. Maybe the target is better at her job than her bully. Maybe the target has management's eye and the bully doesn't. Maybe the target is better liked. Maybe the target wears nicer clothes. It could be a myriad of things. But for whatever reason, that perpetrator usually selects one or two victims and not everybody. The victim or the target is never to blame for a bully's behavior of targeting her. Okay? Now, it could also be a problem with the organization. And very often that ties into management. Does management even recognize bullying behaviors, even those subtle ones? Does management have the knowledge and skill as to how to intervene when they've seen the bullying? And does management understand how to prevent it in the first place? And then we have the issue of the system. So, for example, healthcare is known as a notoriously toxic work environment, and we see lots of bullying. All right? Not just female to female, but bullying. So, what is it within the healthcare system? And we're not just talking about a single hospital or clinic or only a hospital within a certain town. This goes on worldwide. What is it about healthcare, for example, in which bullying would occur? And another system is schools. What is it about a school system? Now, we see most of it with kids, but even so, what is it about a school system that would cause bullying to be the norm? So let's look at some of these causes and contributing factors. And excuse me, I got to take a drink. Well, one of them is a power imbalance. And we know that power is not only the formal power of your boss, but you can have an informal power of other people within your work group or within the organization. It can be due to poor processes and structures. How is the hiring process, the firing process? What about your promotions? And what are your structures anyway within your organization? Is it heavy in management? Is it heavy in the worker bees? And what difference does that make? Is your organization going through a lot of change? And oh my gosh, what organization isn't? And with that change, people become scared. What's this going to mean for my job? Am I going to be possibly fired or demoted? Could this person that I'm targeting, is that person going to get the job that I want? So it's scary. Then we've got informal alliances. You know, remember when you were in, well, we called it junior high back in my day. I suppose it's middle school now. But we had all these little groups, these little cliques, right? And we hung out with those people. We didn't really hang out with others. Well, I think the girls were especially into that. And we see that now in the workplace as well. And the informal alliances may not necessarily be spoken about, but everybody knows they exist. And maybe it's an informal alliance between the supervisor and her direct reports, where she generally has coffee or lunch or breaks with the same people all the time. Now, do we all have the right to enjoy certain people at work more than others? Absolutely we do, and we're going to like some better than others. And that's pretty much a given. And we might be more prone then to have lunch with them or coffee. But you can't exclude your other colleagues. That isn't professional, it is inappropriate, and it is rude and incivil. Competition can be a cause for bullying. And if you don't have very many opportunities for promotions, then competition can really raise the ire. What are your reward systems in your organization? Who gets rewarded and why? And what about clarity of roles and responsibilities? And is there a tolerance and even a reward for misconduct? I can't tell you how many times I've gone into organizations as a consultant and seen that it has been some of the worst bullies that have been promoted into management positions. Often it's low satisfaction with management. Why? Because management is allowing this kind of a culture to exist. And then we have psychological theories. So, you think about it. We all grew up in different homes. Some of us grew up in homes where hugging and saying I love you were commonplace. Others grew up in homes where you didn't really touch and there wasn't an expression of love. Some of us might be diagnosed with bipolar, some with depression. Some of us might have anger issues. Some of us might have addiction. So you've got all these other issues that are contributing as well. So when you think about putting together a strategic plan to minimize any kind of rude, disrespectful, bullying behavior in your workplace, take a look at these bullets. How can you influence these bullets, these behaviors that are reflected in the bullets to minimize bullying? And what can you do specifically to minimize any bullying among women? So here are some examples of how management can bully. And of course, these are just some examples. So have any of you done any of this or been on the receiving end of any of these? Abuse in America's workplaces is accepted right now. Most people expect it, that it's going to happen. Sometimes it's encouraged. Now, it might be tacitly encouraged, but it can be encouraged even when nobody confronts it. That's encouraging it. It's accepting it. And then the bullying becomes endemic within the fabric of the organization. So it's interwoven, and it becomes normalized. And it very often then is symptomatic of a poorly run, dysfunctional organization. So go ahead and read this quote as well. There's lots of research on whether there's a difference in management styles based on whether you are a woman or a man. And we get some different results. Regardless of that, we do, all of us, whether you're male or female, expect our female bosses to behave differently than the men. And we are not as forgiving to women who are assertive. Now, assertive is not aggressive. If a man is aggressive, we sort of expect that as a boss. And that's the masculine hegemony of management. Many women have learned that same style. The research shows that when you are a woman and you're in management, that you really have to walk between a rock and a hard place. In that if you use assertiveness, which remember is respectful, it means you're okay and I'm okay, that if you are a woman in general, but particularly a woman supervisor, and you are assertive, women and men might be more likely to view you as aggressive. If, as a woman supervisor, you tend to be on the more passive side and more of a collaborator, which women typically are, you do run the risk then of being viewed as weak and ineffective. So you're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't. But many women have taken on the traditional stereotypical masculine style of management. I encourage you to read this article that is written on the lower half of the page. It's a good one. Now, why else do women bully? So I just gave you one example. Here's another one. It's called sex segregation. Now, these are all theories. Sex segregation says that most of us hang out in either the horizontal, and the L should be up on the other line there when they redid these. The vertical, the L should be up there. But at any rate, the horizontal workers are the worker bees. Now, those can be men and women, certainly. The vertical workers are both men and women, except the higher up the rung of the ladder you go, more and more women are not included. They are not promoted into the C-suite. And if they are promoted into the C-suite, it's usually as, for example, the vice president of HR. You don't see women, very many women, on the boards of directors. You do not see women as CEOs, as COOs, as CFOs. Now we're seeing many women in director positions, and of course women are managers and supervisors. But the theory went that because you have fewer women in leadership positions, it sets the stage then for women to be more of a bully to other women as a result. Now, there's also something called sex role spillover. Now, this is another theory as to why women may bully other women. And the theory is that the positions that we hold in the workplace are very often mirrors of the positions that we, men and women, hold in society. So, for example, when we look at admins in your company, how many of them are men? When you look at CEOs in your company, how many are men? Now, what is an admin? An admin is sort of a caretaker, right? They report to someone, and that someone tells them what to do, and they do it because they're taking care of their boss. So that mirrors the caretaker role that women hold in the families and in society. Now, if the CEO is a man, that mirrors the role that men often play in the family. They're the head of the household. Now, I know, things are changing. They are changing. They have not changed, however. And we still see, as much as we think that, yes, women are now head of the household much more frequently, and they are. And men might be stay-at-home dads, and they are. We still have a long way to go. We see, for example, many more men, many more women going to medical school and law school than we see men going into nursing school. So as women's roles are beginning to change and women are taking on more responsibility, right now for both medical school and law school, we have more women enrolling than we do men. So we're starting to see these changes, but we have a way to go. So again, the stereotypical roles of men and women in our companies that still are holding play a role in how women will bully other women. Now, I'm going to let you read this quote as well that starts with the word patriarchy. Now, Patriarchy is not male bashing. Patriarchy is referring to a system of which we are all a part. And patriarchy is where we take a look at Congress, for example, in the United States. Hey, for the first time now, we're going to have more women in Congress, but still less than 20%. We have yet to have a female president. Take a look at pay. We still have unequal pay. Take a look at the roles that women play in the media, TV, and movies. Women are rarely not the main lead. They are an ancillary lead, and they're very often playing the role of either the victim or the sex object or both. All of these are examples of patriarchy, and those are just some of the more common types of patriarchy. I strongly encourage you to read this book by Alan Johnson. He is a sociologist, and the book is excellent about patriarchy. Now, part of patriarchy involves silence. We don't speak up, and patriarchy can be largely invisible until you start learning about it and you see how enmeshed societies around the world are in patriarchy. Now, part of patriarchy is oppression, and this is largely unconscious. So let's look at oppression. As women are oppressed by society, all right? Now, there are others who are oppressed by our patriarchal society as well, but we're only talking about women today. So when you are at work, you are also oppressed. So this is another theory. Now, what women do is they take on the perception that the oppressor's actions and beliefs about the oppressed are accurate and positive, so that the oppressor's thoughts and behavior then become internalized into women's thoughts and behavior. And women, therefore, then start to believe in their own deficiencies. They feel powerless and helpless. Now, remember, much of this can be unconscious. Once you start seeing it, it's not comfortable to see. Now, how you can tell when some of this is going on is when you hear one woman say to another, doesn't do any good to tell anybody what's going on. Nothing changes anyway. So what do you hear there? That's oppression. That's a sense of powerlessness. That's a sense of hopelessness. And as a result, then, as women, we begin to dislike our own group because we're taking on the beliefs of the oppressor. And in the workplace, who is the oppressor? Well, the oppressor are those in the C-suite, who are almost always men, those that are in management. Now, women can also be oppressors if they are in management positions. But even a woman who's in a management position who can be an oppressor is still oppressed because she is female. I know it gets kind of convoluted, and some of you might be going, oh, geez, I don't like this. I know when I talk about this on face-to-face meetings, some people get angry, and some will cry and say, I finally get it. And so as a result of the dislike of one's own group, we displace the anger and the dislike that we're feeling towards women, towards our oppressor, onto our group because they're women. And there are women who are misogynists, you know. It's not just men who can be misogynists, but women can be as well. Again, this is largely unconscious. So that's another theory. Now, we also have tokenism. And interestingly, tokenism is when there's not as many women in male positions. Tokenism, we can say, might exist if it was reversed. For example, I'm going to use nursing again. It's the most obvious, because when we do have male nurses, they are sort of a token in the nursing profession. But you know what? They're not treated as tokens. They are invited to all of the wedding showers. They're invited to the baby showers. They're included in the group. Whereas women, who are the token working with men, are generally not as likely to be included. So another theory. And so the theory goes then that if there are only a few women that are working with men, that the women want to be accepted by the men. As a result, the token women will take on the feelings and the words that men will have towards women. So the women will also tell dirty jokes or make negative comments about women. All right? And they will bully other women that they're working with so that they're accepted by the men. Now, again, this is just a theory. Now, what we know is that the more women in power positions in the company, the less female-to-female bullying there is. Now, what do we mean by women? How many women? It's generally shown that a minimum of 20% women in senior level positions negates female-to-female bullying, because women automatically then are less likely to be oppressed. The whole idea about gender is less salient. They're seen as more equal, and they don't have a need to be angry. They don't feel as powerless and hopeless. So take a look at how many women of power are in your organization. Now, this is an older study, but this shows what women who were angry towards other women, what some of their characteristics were. And it makes sense, doesn't it? They wouldn't feel as good about themselves. They'd be angry at men as well. They don't have as much self-efficacy, so they don't think that they do as good a work on the job. They might be more dependent on men, less intimate. And we're not talking about sexual intimacy here, but intimacy in terms of relationships and friendships. They're not as happy. Makes sense, right? And they generally are more acceptable of interpersonal violence. Now, there are a number of tort claims that will come out. Bullying is not illegal. All right? We have no federal law against it. We do have a couple of state laws against it, but even then, those state laws are not actionable, which means even if you're being bullied, it does not mean that you can sue. And when you look at these tort laws, they are very, very difficult to bring into the courtroom. The most common one that I get brought into as an expert witness is negligence. So the negligent hiring or supervision. The others are very difficult. So how do you know if you've got one woman bullying another, is she really bullying this woman? Or could she even be harassing her based on the law? Well, you have to look at whether or not the behavior is welcomed. You have to look, now these are the parameters that the law says. Is the quote-unquote bullying or the misconduct so severe and or pervasive that it interferes with the target's ability to do her job and create a hostile work environment based on the perspective of any reasonable, and I'm going to say woman here, and is it sexual and or gender-based, or is it based on any other protected class? So let's take a look, first of all, at female-to-female bullying, and we'll say it's a white woman and a white woman. How do you know that the bully is not targeting that woman because she is a woman? Ooh, that's a tough one. So when we talk about whether it's sexual and or gender-based, sexual, of course, we're referring to your more overt kinds of sexual misconduct. dirty jokes, touching, innuendo, name calling, that kind of thing. Gender-based, however, is making negative comments about women or bullying, quote unquote, a woman just because she's a woman. Now, if you've got other protected classes that are being targeted, female to female, maybe it's a white female and a black female, or a black female and an Asian female, or a 20-year-old bullying a 50-year-old, you get the idea. How do you know that one woman isn't bullying the other woman because she's a member of that protected class? You don't, unless you do an investigation. So make sure that you are well versed on your harassment laws. These are the legal parameters that would indicate that it could be illegal harassment and not bullying. So anytime somebody comes to you with a complaint that you think on the surface appears to be bullying, I'd encourage you that it is at your own peril that you do not investigate. Now, the female to female, you would have to demonstrate, if it's, say, both women are in the same protected class, you would have to show that one woman is, quote unquote, hostile to the other woman because of her sex in order for it to be sexual or gender-based harassment. Would one woman bully another woman if the target was a man? Now, chances are no, only in that women don't usually bully men because men have more power, they're taller, they're bigger, they're stronger. So this would be a tough one. But it came about during a 1998 U.S. Supreme Court ruling that indicated that same-sex harassment is a reality and it doesn't have to have anything whatsoever to do with sexual attraction. Now, that particular case dealt with male-to-male harassment, but the Supreme Court specifically said it applies female-to-female as well. And this did go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So this is how gender-based harassment works. It's a combination of these three forms of misconduct. All right, now the same can be true with race-based, etc. And so gender harassment then is a form of a hostile work environment. You'd have to look at your environmental context, and is there gender typing of the occupation, gender composition of the work group, is it skewed male to female? And what is the organizational climate? Is there a lot of horseplay, for example? All of those things can lend itself to an increase in female-to-female bullying and also to female-to-female harassment and other harassment. So you want to take a look at your policy, and you want to intervene when you see any inappropriate behavior between women, or the other way as well. Is the behavior inappropriate? If it is, it's probably against your organization's code of conduct policy. You need to intervene there before it could possibly become illegal. Retaliation looks like this. Now, this is not an all-inclusive list, but it's a pretty good one. Retaliation is only illegal if it's harassment or discrimination. Retaliation against somebody for bullying is not illegal, but hey, you don't care. You don't want any retaliation. All right? And just as a side, by the way, in 2017, for the 5th year in a row, retaliation claims to the EEOC rose to almost 50% of the total claims. And retaliation is much less difficult for an employer, much more difficult for an employer to defend in the courts. So there's an impact of horizontal violence. Remember, horizontal violence can be female to female. It's across peer to peer. And these are some of the things that we see. So look at how that's going to have such a negative impact then on your work environment. This gives you an idea of what the impact of bullying is on the target and the witnesses, here on the work unit, and here on the organization. And you'll notice that I mentioned witnesses. You do not need to be the direct target of the bully in order to be negatively impacted by her. And the reason for that is specific neurons in the brain called mirror neurons. This is true for children as well. So you may have one bully. That bully may only target one woman, but every other woman in your department is also a victim to that bully if she is aware of it happening, she observes it or hears it. So what do you do if it happens to you? Make sure that you document. Even if you do nothing with the documentation, you document. And be as detailed as you can. Tell the individual to stop. We'll talk about how to do that. You report it. You follow the policy and the procedure. This is what most people do. They ignore it. I'm encouraging you not to if you feel safe. Others use humor. They might just dismiss it by saying, oh, you know what, she's going through a divorce. We got to give her a little leeway. By trying to understand, they might respectfully confront the bully, report it, which I encourage you, document. I can't stress that enough. And your communication, you give feedback to the bully. You're open and you're honest. You express a feeling and you use I statements. And you're respectful. You do not want to stoop to that person's level. So how does it work? This is how it works. We're going to go back to Joni and Susie. And Susie's decided she wants to let Joni know she doesn't like it when Joni treats her that way in a staff meeting. So this is how it works. This is Susie now. Joni, I don't like it when you roll your eyes at me, sigh, cross your arms over your chest, and turn away from me in a staff meeting because you don't like what I say. So I'd like you to stop, please. All right? Very simple. Susie described the situation. She used I statements. She also used observable, objective feedback. And she said the behavior must stop. Now you'll notice there's something else down there called a broken record. This is an assertiveness technique. Now back in my day, we used to have these round vinyl things that played music that we called a record. And if any of you are my age, you know, they would sometimes crack and they would repeat. And so this is how it would work. Joni might say to Susie, oh, Susie, for crying out loud, get a life. This is what Susie does. Joni, I told you, I don't like it when you cross your arms over your chest, turn away from me, sigh, and roll your eyes when I'm speaking, and I'd like you to stop. So she repeats it. She's still respectful. She repeats it because what Joni's trying to do is manipulate her and to get it to be about Susie instead of about Joni. This broken record technique works very well on your spouses and on your teenagers, by the way, as well. So Joni comes back again and says, well, so what are you going to do about it? And Susie said, I'm telling you, I want it to stop. I don't want you doing A, B, and C anymore, and if you continue, I'm going to report you. Okay? How else might she confront the offender? She might write this in a note and personally give it to Joni. She may write it in a note, put it in an envelope, seal it, and put it in Joni's mailbox at work. She might take the code of conduct policy and tape it to Joni's monitor and highlight those things that reflect Joni's behavior. Or she could report it right off the bat to her manager or to HR. Doing it if you feel safe. Now, these are all the reasons why people do not confront the offender. And unfortunately, they're the reality. They're not the exception. So people don't feel safe, and for good reason. So it's tough. So what should management do? Well, you've got to prevent it from happening in the first place, stop it when it occurs, keep it from recurring, and don't tolerate any reprisals. So what do? You prevent it, And even if your whole company isn't preventing it, that doesn't mean you can't. You've got to look for it and call it out and bring in some training. Make sure you follow your policy and procedure. You must. Be sure you know how to intervene and document. You as a manager, you document. And if possible, necessary, you change the environment. Now, I've given you some handouts on how to give feedback. I am not going to go through these. This can be used by the target, can be used by the manager, can be used by HR. So anyway, this I'm just giving to you to use. You want to make sure that you are supportive, but using candor at the same time. This is a very frequently used feedback mechanism that I would guess a good share of you have used before. But it's, again, something for you to look at. Today's session is not about communication. I do a training on communication as well. But anyway, I think you will find that this will be helpful for you. All right? So what questions do you have? So let's open it up for questions.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for your presentation today. And let me unmute the lines of the attendees. So if there's any questions, they will share the asking right now.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello.
Hi, I can hear you.
My name is Michael.
Hi, Michael.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
You came close to it, but you didn't touch on the issue if workplace dating and where the alleged bully or aggressor is dating management or ownership.
Well, I'll cover all of that under the harassment webinar. I wasn't considering that, but
okay.
First of all, you ask a good question. Each company needs to establish their own policy about people dating.
Right.
And it's at a risk if the company is going to allow a manager to date one of their direct reports. And usually what we say is if you two want to really date, then you've got to change the reporting structure so that that individual employee does not report anymore to the manager if they want to date. And it is always a risk if the two of them are dating and one or the other does not want to date anymore,
right.
And you still have to work together. It can create, some real discomfort, not only for those two individuals, but for others that they work with that were aware of the dating relationship.
Right. I've stumbled across probably a half a dozen articles on workplace dating, and
yes.
they talk about sometimes it can work if the participants are of equal status in the company, but they almost all say that an owner dating an employee is absolutely not acceptable.
Yes, and that's right. I think, people meet and marry people in the workplace. So
sure.
When you've got two employees that are equal status want to date, go at it. Have fun.
Right.
But generally speaking, yes, if you're in a management position, you do not date a direct report. But I have seen people change the reporting structure. Go ahead.
But do you have is there another seminar, or do you have any literature that I can that would be available?
You mean on dating relationships?
Yes, and again, especially supervisor, owner, manager with a subordinate.
I don't have any myself. When I go to look for different things, I just Google it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Do you belong to SHRM by any chance?
To what?
To SHRM, Society of Human Resource Managers?
No.
Okay, because they've got all sorts of information on everything HR related.
What is that called?
It's SHRM, SHRM. It's an acronym for the Society of Human Resources Managers.
Wait a minute.
It's an excellent organization, whether you're in human resources or not. It's just got a host of resources for you. white papers and.
But what was that? Can you say that? Can you say that the spelling again?
Yes, it's S as in Sam.
Yep.
H R M as in Mary. SHRM, and it's an acronym for Society of Human Resources Managers.
Gotcha. Okay.
Or management.
The situation apparently has evolved over a few years, where let's say the bully has had issues with several women in the company, and it's almost like some people have said to me that the person might feel threatened that that another woman might direct the attention from the boss away from her.
Yes, it can be threatening, very much so. Yeah.
Been quite an issue, but
yeah, I can imagine that it would be.
Yeah. Okay.
If you want to give me a call to talk about it, feel free. I think my phone number is on. Well,
it's the Delaware number.
You know what? Send me an email and we'll set up a time to talk. It's just Susan at StraussConsulting.net.
How to spell Strauss?
S as in Sam, T as in Tom, R A U S as in Sam, S as in Sam. I think it's
consultant.
On Susan at StraussConsulting.net.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you send me an email and we can set up a phone conversation.
That'd be great. Okay.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
Lisa, Linda, Mary, anybody any questions?
No.
No. So I think there is no more questions. And if you have any more questions, you can always just send us through an email with a support email address, which is already on the screen. And also a copy of this webinar, record version of this webinar, is available on our website. You can still purchase it for training purpose, or you can refer your colleagues for them to purchase the webinars. And browse the website for all the upcoming webinars. And thank you everyone for participating. Thank you for your time.
All right.
For participating. Thank you everyone. And thank you, Susan. Thank you for your presentation today.
Yes, thank you, and I apologize for the problems with the technology and my delay.
That's all right. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.